Welcome back to Look Movie Recaps. Today, we are going to recap a 2020 movie titled The Silencing. Please be advised that there are spoilers ahead. The movie opens with a dead person in brightly colored clothing floating down whitewater rapids. Elsewhere, we see a pair of hunters about to shoot deer. Rayburn Swanson stops them, confiscates their weapons, and indicates that they're trespassing in a sanctuary. The hunters seem to know him, and their conversation indicates that Rayburn used to be a hunter himself. He says to them, "People change." "No, they don't," one of them replies. Rayburn goes home to his dog, Thor. He owns the surveillance equipment that monitors the sanctuary. We are introduced to Sheriff Alice. She picks up her brother, Brooks, from Carl, the sheriff of the local tribal police, who found him at the factory, which is implied to be a seedy location. Brooks looks to have been in an altercation but refuses to tell Carl what happened at the factory. As Alice drives Brooks home, he confesses that he was involved in a fight with Sam Moonblood over a woman. He says Sam and someone named Olson are involved in all sorts of bad things. Brooks expresses discomfort as they drive past a barn. An investigation into a possible homicide involves Alice. Rayburn entertains a school field trip while slightly intoxicated. He explains that he manages a 50 square miles sanctuary. One of the kids mentions how Rayburn used to be a prolific hunter. He says he left that life behind because his daughter didn't like him doing it. A young girl's body washes ashore, prompting Alice and the local cops to investigate. According to a forensic officer, the body likely ended up in the water after a postmortem approximately a week ago. The body has a vertical scar on the throat area. The cops find a spearhead embedded in a nearby tree and believe the girl may have been hunted for sport. We see Rayburn driving around town, putting up missing person posters for his 14-year-old daughter, Gwen. Soon after, he runs into Carl and his wife, Debbie. Their conversation reveals that Debbie is Rayburn's ex-wife. She invites Rayburn to a funeral that she is organizing for Gwen. She wants Rayburn to sign a document formally presuming Gwen's death in order to get a death certificate issued. We see Alice examining the spearhead from earlier in her office. Alice shines a flashlight through it, revealing an emblem that reads MB. Back home, a drunk Rayburn sees news of the unidentified girl's body being found and drives over. Alice visits her brother, Brooks. They talk about their parents' deaths. Brooks asks his sister if she'd have his back if he was ever involved in something terrible. A moment later, Rayburn shows up looking for Alice and requests that she show him the dead body of the girl. They visit the mortuary where he confirms it's not Gwen. Later in the evening, Alice finds Rayburn at a bar. She wants to help find Gwen to prove herself to the town. Rayburn is not optimistic. He considers it a cold case as Gwen went missing 5 years prior. The next morning, Rayburn sees a person in a heavily camouflaged ghillie suit take down one of his cameras in the sanctuary. He puts together his own hunting kit and drives over there. He receives a shot from Spears which hits his shoulder, but he manages to escape. The stalled vehicle prevents him from driving away. Walking around, he finds another pickup truck presumably belonging to the hunter. He discreetly keys a small X next to its fuel tank. Before returning home on foot and rewinding surveillance footage, he discovers that the hunter has been tracking a human girl. He returns to the forest, makes contact with the hunter, but is ultimately unable to capture them. Alice presents the found spearhead to a local hunting gear seller. He informs her that the Atlatl, a rare and now illegal handheld spear-slinging weapon of ancient design, likely fired the spear. He refers her to Sam Moonblood, who hangs out at the factory and sells Atlatls of his own construction. In the forest, Rayburn finds the hunted girl unconscious. Alice visits the factory, seemingly a hangout spot for delinquents and unhoused people. When Alice inquires about Sam Moonblood, she learns that he's probably out hunting. A girl named Patty tells Alice where she may find Moonblood. In the forest, Rayburn is carrying the unconscious girl. He comes across a small underground bunker. The girl becomes conscious. She seems unable to speak and indicates in writing that her name is Molly. They take shelter for the night. Alice shows up at Moonblood's suspected residence, which is unoccupied. She finds Atlatl spearheads with the same MB initials. She runs into Carl, who follows her there. He shows her a picture of Molly, who is missing. He tells her that her mother hangs out at the factory. According to him, she said she got into an altercation with Brooks. Alice refuses to believe that her brother could have anything to do with the kidnapping, while Carl seems to consider it a possibility. The next morning, Alice visits Brooks's residence. He's not there, but she finds newspaper clippings about kidnappings. Rayburn and Molly continue on foot. As they take a break, he shows Molly a picture of Gwen, whom she doesn't recognize. As they arrive at Rayburn's residence, they hear Thor whistling. The hunter, still hiding behind the ghillie suit, ambushes Rayburn. Molly attempts to combat the hunter, but his spear stabs her. Just then, Alice arrives, meaning to ask Rayburn about the guns he confiscated from those hunters earlier. She holds the hunter at gunpoint, who surrenders. However, because of his knuckle-cracking habit, Alice recognizes him as Brooks. Instead, she turns around and shoots Rayburn, allowing her brother to escape. Rayburn also escapes this situation. He calls an ambulance for Molly, traps Alice in a bear trap, and drives her car to Carl and Debbie's residence. He tells them how Alice shot him in order to protect her brother. Alice calls for backup and requests the arrest of Rayburn. Carl and Debbie take Rayburn to the factory where their confidant, Dr. Boone Sean Smith, treats him. Brooks just arrived at the factory looking for drugs. After a foot chase, Carl arrests him. Alice receives this notification and is the next person to arrive. Carl stands his ground, believing Rayburn's story, and reminds her that she does not have jurisdiction over his county and refuses to let her see Brooks. Shortly afterwards, Brooks leads the cops, including Alice and Carl, to the barn. They find Sam Moonblood. Carl explains that Brooks has been keeping Moonblood here since their altercation, but he also denies having any knowledge of Molly. Carl believes that Brooks was present at the factory when Alice and Rayburn had their encounter, although the identity of the hunter remains unknown. Carl suggests placing Alice on leave and conducting an investigation into her shooting of Rayburn. Alice calls off the search for Rayburn. They inform Rayburn that Brooks was not the hunter. The following day, Carl calls Alice over to question Moonblood. He mentions that Rayburn changed his story, saying the suspect must have shot him. Moonblood says he doesn't track the names of his customers who sell at Laddle's. He doesn't recognize the found spearhead, saying it's made from a different wood than what he uses. As Rayburn cleans out bottles of alcohol, presumably with the intention of quitting, we see a flashback to when his daughter disappeared from his car as he stopped to buy whiskey. To this day, he holds on to that old bottle of whiskey. Alice visits gravely injured Molly in the hospital. She notices the same kind of scar on her throat as Jane Doe's body from earlier. Later, Rayburn comes across a pickup truck identical to the one he found in the forest, presumably belonging to the mystery hunter. He chases it down and looks for his mark but doesn't find one. With the intention of tracking down the hunter, he hangs around busy roads until he spots another one of these trucks. He follows this one until it stops at a house. He finds his mark next to the fuel tank, but he learns that it's being driven by an old man who lives by himself, unlikely to be the hunter. The man tells Rayburn that his neighbor sometimes uses the truck. Rayburn decides to pay this neighbor's house a visit. Breaking in, he finds a dark room with posters and newspaper clippings of people who have gone missing in the area. He also finds a room with an unconscious girl with her throat surgically cut open. At that moment, Dr. Boone ambushes him, injecting Rayburn with a drug to induce unconsciousness. Alice goes back to the hospital to obtain an autopsy report. There, she discovers that Boone's daughter, Melissa, met her demise after a drunk driver struck her in a forest. Melissa appears to be wearing a pendant with exactly the same MB initials as the spearheads in a framed picture. With police backup, Alice breaks into Boone's residence and finds the unconscious girl. Neither Boone nor Rayburn are there. She notices Gwen Swanson's missing poster and wants to find Rayburn. Boone drives Rayburn, who is drifting back into consciousness, into the forest. Boone gives Rayburn a head start as he puts on his hunting suit. When Alice arrives at Rayburn's place, she discovers Thor barking at the surveillance system and witnesses Rayburn sprinting through the dark sanctuary pursued by the hunter. Armed, she runs on foot into the sanctuary to find them. Rayburn eventually sneaks up on Boone and overpowers him. He asks Boone, "Why Gwen?" Boone reveals that a drunk driver killed his daughter, Melissa, and that he figured Gwen, his daughter, would also grow up to be a drain on everyone. He says he only took the ones that no one would miss. Rayburn knocks Boone unconscious and begins dragging him towards a location where he will be killed. At that moment, Alice arrives and holds Rayburn at gunpoint. He asks her to shoot him again or walk away. He drops Boone onto an old defunct animal trap of his own, all but killing him. A fatally injured Boone asks if Rayburn will leave him to die like an animal, to which Rayburn replies that he wouldn't leave an animal suffering as he covers up the trap, deserting Boone. Back in town, many people, including Molly, attend Gwen's funeral. We witness the demolition of the barn where Brooks kept Moonblood. Alice's police radio informs us that Dr. Boone remains missing, suspected of being a serial killer. The movie closes on Rayburn, presumably about to pour out the bottle of whiskey that he purchased the day Gwen was kidnapped. Thank you for watching. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe for more recaps. Until next time, have a nice day.